You ever notice how people will cheer you on for being generous, right up until the moment it actually costs you something? There's this strange pressure baked into society where you're supposed to give, and give, your time, your energy, your resources, because that's what good people do. But if you look closely, if you pay attention to the undercurrent beneath all the polite smiles and encouraging advice, you'll find something else hiding there. The expectation that your generosity is for other people's convenience, not your benefit. And that's exactly where Machiavelli's warning hits like a slap across the face. He basically says, be very careful with generosity, not because it's evil, not because kindness is weak, but because generosity, especially with money, can quietly hollow you out while everyone applauds you for doing it. And the wild part is, you often don't feel the damage until it's too late. You think you're being noble, you think you're earning favor, but what you're really building is a trap with your own hands. Most people don't like hearing this. It feels harsh, like something only a cold person would believe. But take a second and try this. Think of a time you helped someone financially. Could be a loan, a gift, covering something for them, whatever. Now ask yourself, what was their reaction a month later? Were they grateful? Maybe for a day, a week, but did that gratitude last? Did it make them admire you more, respect you more, or did they just move on, as if that moment meant almost nothing in the long run? Worse, have you ever watched someone you helped start to expect it from you again? That's the uncomfortable truth Machiavelli understood. Generosity rarely purchases loyalty. More often, it breeds entitlement. This is why he warns rulers, leaders, anyone who holds influence, even on a tiny scale, to avoid being too generous with money. Because you're not just losing coins, you're losing power. And once people get used to taking from you, they don't just want more, they demand it. And when you stop, suddenly you're the villain. Isn't that crazy? The same people who once praised your kindness will turn on you the moment your resources run dry, as if you owed them something. Machiavelli watched leaders destroy themselves trying to look benevolent. He noticed how quickly people forget 100 acts of generosity the moment they don't receive the 101st. He saw that being generous puts you in this awful position where you have to keep giving just to maintain the image you created, and that constant pressure forces you to drain your own wealth, your time, your mental reserve, until you're empty. And emptiness, in leadership or in life, is dangerous. So the real question isn't, is generosity good? It's, what does generosity cost? And even more importantly, who actually pays for it? There's this story, nothing flashy, just a simple situation of a small-town merchant who loved being known as the generous one. He would cover meals for people who were struggling, hand out loan after loan without expecting much back, always the first to offer help. Everyone loved him for it, but behind closed doors, his business was bleeding. When he finally had to stop being everyone's safety net, the town didn't thank him for years of kindness. They whispered, they mocked him. Some claimed he'd been selfish all along for not continuing to help. That's when he learned the truth Machiavelli was talking about. When your generosity stops, people remember that moment far more vividly than all the moments before it. The thing is, generosity doesn't just drain your wallet. It distorts people's perception of you. It conditions them. It trains them to see you as the person who will always say yes. And once they learn that, good luck ever saying no again without consequences. Machiavelli's insight is that generosity is an investment with a negative return. You spend resources, and what you get back isn't loyalty or admiration or long-term respect. What you usually get back is dependence, expectation, and resentment the moment you stop feeding that dependence. People remember being denied help far more vividly than being given help. That's human psychology, not cynicism. And the irony? The more generous you are, the more you eventually have to take from others just to sustain yourself. through taxes if you're a ruler, through debt if you're a regular person, through burnout if your generosity is emotional rather than financial. And when you finally reach the point where you need to ask for something in return, people recoil. They don't want generous people to ever have needs. They want them to be fountains, always flowing, never empty. It's funny how generosity looks like this beautiful virtue on the surface, but underneath, it messes with your relationships, your reputation, your stability. Machiavelli wasn't saying be greedy. He wasn't saying be cruel. He was saying something way more grounded. Don't sacrifice your strength in the name of appearing virtuous. A leader who ruins themselves trying to look noble ends up serving no one. And honestly, the same applies to a normal person living their life. But here's something even more subtle. Generosity actually weakens your ability to say no. Once people know you're willing to give, they'll challenge your boundaries. Not maliciously, not always consciously, but they'll do it. They test the limits of what you'll provide. And then, when you eventually tighten your boundaries, they feel betrayed, because you taught them to expect the opposite. Think about the dynamic this creates. If you give too much too fast, you set a standard you can't maintain. If you give slowly and carefully, people may say you're stingy. You lose either way unless you understand the deeper principle Machiavelli was pointing to. Generosity should never come from weakness. It should never come from a desire to be liked. It should never be used as a tool to buy affection, because affection bought is fragile and fake. So how do you navigate this without becoming some hardened, closed-off person who never helps anyone? Well, you start by shifting your perspective. Generosity is most dangerous when it's done to gain approval, when it's done to look good, when it's done because you fear what people will think if you don't. Those motivations put you in a submissive position. They make you vulnerable to manipulation. They weaken your foundation. But generosity that comes from strength, where you choose when and how to give, and in a way that doesn't compromise your stability, doesn't trap you, it doesn't control you, it doesn't make you dependent on people's praise. That's the kind Machiavelli had no issue with. What he warned against was the reckless kind, the performative kind, the self-destructive kind. It's like planting seeds in soil that won't grow anything. You can keep planting, keep watering, keep exhausting your time and resources, but nothing will grow except disappointment. And there's another layer to this that people don't talk about enough. When you're generous in ways that stretch you too thin, you actually become less capable of helping in the long run. You start making poorer decisions. You become stressed, resentful, quietly bitter. Your judgment slips. You can't focus. And eventually, the people who depended on you suddenly find you unreliable, not realizing you were only unreliable because you were too reliable for too long. That's why Machiavelli stresses the importance of maintaining your own strength above everything else. Because strength gives you the freedom to choose. Weakness forces you to give even when you don't want to. And when generosity stops being a choice, it stops being generosity at all. When you understand this, you see money, and giving in general, differently. You stop treating it as proof of your goodness. You stop tying your self-worth to how much you sacrifice. You stop letting people's expectations dictate your decisions. You start seeing generosity as something that must be controlled, not something that should control you. And all of this leads to one brutal but essential truth. Machiavelli understood better than almost anyone. Being loved for your generosity is temporary, but being hated for withdrawing generosity is intense and lasting. Which raises a question most people avoid, because it exposes something uncomfortable about human nature. Why do people feel more betrayed by the lack of a gift than grateful for the gift itself? Why does stopping generosity feel like an attack to them, even when it's just you trying to stay afloat? Because once you give something, in their mind, it becomes theirs. And once something feels like theirs, taking it away feels like theft. This is the psychological landmine Machiavelli wanted people to see clearly. Not because he wanted them to stop being good, but because he wanted them to stop being naive. And once you see this landmine, once you understand how easily generosity can turn into obligation, and obligation into resentment, you start to notice moments in your own life where you walked straight into that trap without realizing it. And it's strange how obvious it looks in hindsight. You replay those moments where you stepped in to help, thinking you were doing the right thing, only to realize later that you weren't actually helping. You were setting a precedent, a silent agreement, a new version of yourself that others began to expect from that day forward. And once that version is out there, people cling to it, even when it drains you. This is why Machiavelli urges caution, not because generosity is wrong, but because people rewrite their memory of you based on what benefits them. They forget what it cost you. They forget how hard it might have been for you to give. They remember only that you gave, and so in their minds, you can always give. If you don't, something feels off to them, as if you've changed. But you didn't change. They simply got used to the version of you that sacrificed itself. There's this unspoken truth we all bump into eventually. People admire generosity from a distance, but up close, they consume it. They treat it like a renewable resource, as if you can keep producing gifts, support, money, whatever it is, without limit. And if you can't, well, suddenly, you're not who they thought you were. This shift in how you're perceived happens fast, sometimes overnight. Machiavelli saw leaders lose their kingdoms this way. You and I might just lose money, reputation, emotional energy, or respect, but the mechanism is the same. The moment your generosity becomes expected, it stops being generosity. It becomes payment, and nobody respects the person who constantly pays. They only enjoy the luxury of what's being paid for. What's even more eye-opening is how quickly people reinterpret your intentions. Give something once, and it's kindness. Give it twice, and it's generosity. Give it 3 times, and it's responsibility. And from the 4th time onward, it's obligation. You're no longer doing something admirable. You're simply fulfilling a role they've assigned to you, a role that costs you more than it costs them. This shift is dangerous because it erodes your ability to say no. The more often you say yes, the heavier no becomes. It gains weight, it shocks people, it disappoints them, and disappointment, in their eyes, feels like a flaw in you rather than an imbalance in the relationship. Machiavelli understood that humans, by nature, remember wounds more than favors, denials more than gifts. That's why he insists that generosity, if done at all, must be controlled, strategic, and rare. What he feared most was the erosion of strength. When leaders made themselves loved through excessive generosity, they didn't just lose money, they lost the authority to act in their own interest later. The people who benefited from their generosity held them hostage with expectations. So when the leader finally reached the point where they needed to enforce discipline, raise taxes, or retract benefits, the backlash was devastating. People didn't see a leader making rational decisions. They saw a betrayer taking something that they believed was theirs. And this isn't far from how everyday life works. You can see this same dynamic in friendships, workplaces, family structures. If you become the one who always picks up the tab, you're expected to continue. If you become the one who always covers shifts or fills in gaps, that becomes your reputation. If you always listen, always help, always give, people unconsciously build a version of reality where you are inexhaustible. Machiavelli warns that this perception is incredibly hard to reverse. Once people see you as a source, they don't want to see you as a person with limits. And the moment you reveal those limits, they feel cheated. But they're not actually cheated. You simply stopped playing a role that was never meant to be permanent. It's interesting how the world loves to praise generosity publicly, yet privately, people use it like a tool. They milk it, they stretch it, they turn it into leverage. And part of the reason this happens is because generosity creates an emotional imbalance. When you give, people feel safe taking. When you give a lot, people feel safer taking more. When you give too much, they start believing they're entitled to what you're giving. And entitlement is a dangerous reaction to inspire. Machiavelli understood that public perception is fragile. Once you're seen as overly generous, any attempt to tighten your boundaries looks like greed. You might not even be trying to save money. You might just be trying to stop losing it. But to others, it feels like a downgrade, like you stole something from them. The psychological backlash can be vicious, because people don't assault you with anger. Sometimes they just retreat with disappointment, or twist your reputation subtly, or act like you're no longer the person they thought you were. This is why Machiavelli, almost counterintuitively, says it's better to be perceived as cautious or even frugal from the start. People may not love it, but they will respect it. And respect is infinitely more durable than affection, bought through generosity. Affection fades. Respect endures. Affection is fragile. Respect is resilient. And perhaps the most important part, affection for your generosity belongs to them. Respect for your discipline belongs to you. But here's the twist. Machiavelli doesn't spell out directly, yet it's woven into everything he writes. True strength comes from being able to choose when to be generous, not being forced into generosity because of expectation. And you can only be in that position if you protect your resources carefully. Money, yes, but also emotional bandwidth, time, energy, reputation. All of these can be drained by excessive giving. Imagine generosity like pouring water from a jug. Most people think the jug is bottomless, or at least they act like it is. You know how much water is actually inside. But if you keep pouring without measuring, without pacing yourself, without checking the weight of the jug every now and then, you'll eventually lift it and realize it's empty. And emptiness, especially when hidden behind a history of giving, can be catastrophic. Not just for your stability, but for your identity. People don't just lose the jug, they lose faith in you for not refilling it endlessly. Machiavelli saw the consequences of this firsthand. Leaders who ruined their treasuries, trying to appear generous, lost everything in the end. Their people didn't thank them for the charity. They resented them for the aftermath. In his world, the downfall was dramatic. Rebellions, invasions, economic collapse. In ours, the downfall shows up in quieter forms: a drained savings account, a burnt-out mind, a relationship dynamic that snapped under the pressure of uneven giving. And what makes this even more revealing is that Machiavelli doesn't say generosity is always bad. He just says it must come after stability, not before it. It must come from a place of plenty, not scarcity. If you weaken yourself to help others, you're not actually helping them. You're simply delaying a collapse that will hit you and everyone around you. This flips the idea of generosity on its head. People want to believe that the most moral path is always the one that sacrifices the self. But Machiavelli argues the opposite. The best thing you can do for others is remain strong, because strength sustains. Strength provides long-term value. Strength allows you to give from abundance, not desperation. And when you give from abundance, your generosity actually means something. It carries weight. It doesn't breed entitlement. It doesn't create hidden debts. It doesn't trap you. It becomes a choice, not a survival strategy. When you look at generosity through this lens, you start noticing all the places where you've overextended yourself without thinking. All the moments where you said yes simply because you didn't want to seem selfish. All the times you paid a bill, covered a cost, or solved a problem because it felt easier than confronting the discomfort of saying no. And suddenly, Machiavelli's warning doesn't sound cold. It sounds like someone telling you to protect your foundation before you try to build on it. The more you think about it, the more you realize something that feels almost embarrassing to admit. Most people don't even notice when generosity hurts you. They're too focused on the benefit. They only see the surface, the act of giving, not the cost beneath it. And because they don't see the cost, they assume it doesn't exist. But you do. You feel it every time. And the weight of that cost doesn't disappear. It stacks. It accumulates. It shapes your relationships, your habits, your sense of self, until one day you look at your life and realize you've built a reality where everyone is comfortable except you. And that's exactly the trap Machiavelli wanted you to avoid.